Kentucky had the unfortunate distinction until yesterday of being the only state in the South with a Democratic legislative body. That changed dramatically yesterday as the Republicans in the Bluegrass state took the state house by defeating 17 Democrats, went from 47 up to 64. It'd been almost as long as it had been since the Cubs won the World Series. 95 years of continuous Democratic control. So that only added a little more happiness to my evening. To more current and national matters, Senator Schumer called yesterday and offered his cooperation, and I said that's certainly what I intended to do, and we talked again today, and that's still the view of both of us, that we want to work together and see what we can accomplish for the American people, not only in the lame duck, but beginning next year. Also, I've had a chance to talk to the President, the Vice President, both of whom called, to President-elect Trump and to Vice President-elect Pence, all today. Not only just offering congratulations where appropriate, but in the case of the President, talk about wrapping up business this year. I'm really proud of the races that we won. If you look across the country, as all of you know, we had a lot of exposure, 24 of us up, only 10 of our Democrat friends. In a day when the American people clearly were expressing themselves for major change in the vote for president, it's noteworthy that only one or maybe two Senate incumbents were defeated. So I think an appropriate way to look at the Senate races, 18 of the Senate candidates actually ran ahead of the presidential candidate. In other races, somewhat behind, kind of a mixed picture. But I think in a day when people were voting for change, they didn't decide they wanted to change the Republican Senate, which I'm proud of. And of course, many of our members actually had bipartisan accomplishments to run on, as distinguished, for example, from the previous Congress where Senator Begich from Alaska had never been allowed to even offer an amendment on a bill in a whole 6-year term. We opened the Senate up. We gave people an opportunity to express themselves, to offer their ideas. In the case of several of our members, there were important accomplishments for their states that they were able to talk about during the course of the campaign. I want to particularly congratulate President-elect Trump. I think we all agree this is a stunning election and clearly an indication the American people would like to try something new. And I know the Speaker shares my view that we would like to see the country go in a different direction and intend to work with him to change courses, to change the course for America. He will have an opportunity to fill a Supreme Court vacancy. As you know, I said in February of this year, to a hail of controversy, that I thought it best that the American people decide who made this appointment to the Supreme Court. I thought I was on pretty firm footing in doing that. It had been 80 years since a vacancy created in the middle of a presidential election year was confirmed by the Senate. You'd have to go back to 1888 to find the last time a vacancy on the Supreme Court in the middle of a presidential election year was confirmed by a Senate of the opposite party of the president. And so the American people have spoken, and President Trump will send us a nominee, I assume, early next year. So with that, let me just throw it open and see what you'd like to discuss. Yeah.
Mr. Leader, considering how Republicans blocked Merrick Garland here, there's never been an outright filibuster of a Supreme Court justice. We have the Abe Fortas situation that's a little bit different. Why would you expect Democrats to handle any nomination from President-elect Trump any differently? And if they do block it, would you expect to return the favor with a nuclear option on Supreme Court justices?
Well, it won't surprise you to know I'm not going to address what might happen in the context of a Supreme Court appointment. What we do know is the new president will fill the vacancy, and I expect it to be handled in the way these court appointments are typically handled. And I would not anticipate any particular strategy that the Democrats might have employed to defeat it, or what we might do in reaction to that.
Did you bring that up with Senator Schumer today?
No, we haven't discussed it.
Do you think comprehensive tax reform is possible next year, and what are some of your other legislative priorities?
Well, we're going to be working with the new president on legislative priorities, but he talked about tax reform, and as some of you know, I think this is really important. In the early part of my service in the Senate, we did the comprehensive tax reform back in 1986, and President Reagan and Democratic Speaker Tip O'Neill had an agreement that it would be revenue neutral to the government, and to the maximum extent possible, try to make America more competitive by lowering the rates for as many as possible. President Obama and I know he had this conversation, I'm sure, with Speaker Boehner and Speaker Ryan as well, talked about it. The current president was not interested in making it revenue neutral to the government. In other words, he wanted to get more money for the government. If we want to make America truly competitive, the goal ought to be, when revenue is produced by the elimination of preferences, use that to buy down the rates. We have a particular acute problem with the corporate tax rate, as everyone admits, thereby creating the opportunity for inversions and the like. And what I would prefer to see, and I haven't had a chance to talk to the president about this yet, is comprehensive tax reform that doesn't just lower taxes for the corporations who are having a hard time competing with the rest of the world, but for most American businesses which are not corporations. They're either S-corps or LLCs. And so we need to have an agreement on what we're advocating. And back in those days, when we did it the last time, there were plenty of Democrats on board for it. Bill Bradley was a key player in it. And hopefully that's the kind of thing we're going to have some bipartisan agreement on and actually make some progress for the country.
Senator McConnell. You've talked before about how in 2018 Republicans have a very favorable map. It's very likely that you'll have the majority through until your own next election in 2020. Are you starting to think about what kind of legacy you'll have, or what kind of stamp you can make on America with these next 4 years?
No. We haven't even started the next Congress yet. There'll be plenty of time to talk about legacies later.
Senator McConnell.
Yeah, I wondered if you had a preference for how long you'd like to fund the government. That's going to come up in about a month. Would you want to go CR just until Trump takes over, or are you thinking an omnibus? Where's your head at on that?
Really haven't talked about that. There are two priorities, it seems to me, for the lame duck. The issue you raised, how are you going to fund the government? And second, excuse me, second, the 21st Century Cures Bill. The president's interested in the precision medicine part of that. The vice president's interested in the cancer moonshot part of it. I'm interested in the regenerative medicine part of it. Senator Alexander and Chairman Upton have done terrific work on this. I'd like to see us finish that important new measure this year. And the president and I discussed those two matters this morning.
Senator McConnell, in June, you expressed concerns about Donald Trump, his comments about Hispanics and potentially harming the Republican Party's relationship with Hispanics, similar to the way Goldwater did with African Americans. I'm wondering, after last night, after this campaign, do you still share those concerns? Do you still have those concerns, number one? And number two, do you support his central policy idea to build a wall on the border with Mexico?
Well, I'm not going to go back and relitigate the events of the past. We have a new president. I'd like for him to get off on a positive start. And I think we should look forward and not backward and kind of rehash and relitigate the various debates we had both internally and with the Democrats over the past year.
What about the wall? That's good. That's a central
We're going to be talking to the president about his agenda. Border security is important. I think even our Democratic friends realize we haven't done a very good job of that. And achieving border security is something I think ought to be high on the list.
Do you have a personal preference on the wall?
I want to try to achieve border security in whatever way is the most effective. Got it.
Senator, did the election results signal an end to the war on coal, which you have talked about? And if so, how does that affect your agenda in the next Congress? And what does that mean for coal jobs in Kentucky?
Well, you know, the war on coal is not a result of any legislation we passed here. One of the things I hope the new president, and he mentioned this during the campaign, will do, is take a look at all of the unilateral actions that the president took, both through executive orders and regulatory overreach of one kind or another, and the coal industry is a perfect example of that. There were a lot of others. And see how much he can undo of the unilateral actions the president took all by himself, which would not require us. So I think in looking at why the country's had such slow growth, the most tepid recovery after a deep recession since World War II, overregulation is the principal reason why I'm pretty confident the president didn't have 1 year of 3% growth. And you saw a whole lot of people who voted for the new president yesterday frustrated. They might not have put it this way, but the lack of growth is the reason for the lack of opportunity and jobs. We got to get this economy going again. We got to take our foot off the brake and put it on the accelerator, and much of that can be done by the president alone, because much of the problem has been created by this president alone. So we'll be working with the administration to make suggestions about what kind of unilateral action he can take to undo some of this regulatory overreach, which has slowed the economy so much. And coal is a good example of that. Yeah.
Can you characterize how you see the Senate majority's relationship with President-elect Trump? Is it to be a partner? Is it to be a facilitator of his agenda? And do you think he shares your perception of the role of a Senate majority in his coming term?
Well, I know he's really happy we still have a Republican majority, and we look forward to working with him. I think most of the things that he's likely to advocate we're going to be enthusiastically for. Where we have differences of opinion, I expect to discuss them privately and not sort of hashing them out in public. But the goal will be to try to get on the same page, to try to turn the country in a different direction. Look, we've had a tutorial here over the last 8 years of big government. Taxes, regulation, big debts. We know what doesn't work. You do all of this stuff, you get slow growth. So in order to get the country going again, we need to undo much of that. And the good news is a lot of it was done by the president by himself. So we're going to, I think, be enthusiastically supportive almost all the time. And where we have differences, we'll talk about them privately and see if we can work them out.
Senator McConnell? Senator McConnell, what's your plan on health care going forward? Do you plan on repealing Obamacare right away?
It's a pretty high item on our agenda, as you know. And I would be shocked if we didn't move forward to keep our commitment to the American people. It was the single worst piece of legislation among many bad pieces of legislation passed in the first 2 years of the Obama presidency. The sooner we can go in a different direction, the better.
Any specific?
But TPP, any chance it comes up in the lame duck, and any chance it comes up under President Trump?
Well, you have to ask him. But TPA is still in place. If the next president wants to negotiate trade agreements, he has the opportunity to do that and to send it up.
The existing framework that President Obama has negotiated, do you think it's dead?
So it's certainly not going to be brought up this year. Yeah. And it'd be up to discussions with the new president as to, you know, I think President-elect made it pretty clear he was not in favor of the current agreement. But he has the latitude, because TPA is in place through the next administration, to negotiate better deals, as I think he would put it, if he chooses to, and sending them up to us for an expedited up or down vote. Yeah.
In September, you and Speaker Ryan both said you wanted to move spending bills on a series of minibuses. Does the election outcome change that plan at all, how you plan to move the appropriation measures in the
Yeah. Well, we'll be talking with the Speaker and with the President about how to wrap up the spending this year. You're asking me a procedural question. I don't blame you for asking it, but I don't know the answer to it right now. We would like to finish funding the government this year. Exactly how to achieve that over a 3-week period is always a matter for discussion, how to package it, differences in the House versus the Senate. But I would like to wrap up the business of funding the government in this fiscal year, this calendar year.
Going back to the Affordable Care Act, do you plan to use budget reconciliation for the repeal and replacement, or do you plan to reach out to Senator Schumer?
You're asking me a question you know I'm not going to answer. All of that is underway. I think let's just stipulate that every single Republican thought Obamacare was a mistake, without exception. That's still our view, and you can expect us, with a new president who has the same view, to address that issue. Yeah.
Do you expect to support President-elect Trump's stated goals of withdrawing from NATO and forging a closer alliance with Russia?
Yeah, look, again, that's sort of like Manu's question, sort of go back and relitigate various things that were said during the past year. I want to look forward. I will say for myself, I think the NATO alliance is every bit as important today as it ever was. I think Article 5 means something. You attack any member of NATO, you have us to deal with. I want the Russians to understand that fully. Paul?
Senator, in the last time there was a unified control of the White House, the Senate, and the House, your belief was that the Democrats in 2009 and 10 acted too fast on their own, unilaterally, with no real bipartisanship on stimulus, ACA, Dodd-Frank. How do you avoid those mistakes, given the views of your voters, Republican-based voters right now?
Well, let me just answer it sort of broadly. I think it's always a mistake to misread your mandate. And frequently, new majorities think it's going to be forever. Nothing is forever in this country. We have an election every 2 years, right on schedule. We have had since 1788. And so I don't think we should act as if we're going to be in the majority forever. We've been given a temporary lease on power, if you will, and I think we need to use it responsibly. I think what the American people are looking for is results. And to get results in the Senate, as all of you know, it requires some Democratic participation and cooperation. We were able to do that during the first Obama tenure in the deals, for example, that I negotiated with Biden on 3 different occasions. And we are going to be looking for bipartisan support. And I think overreaching after an election is, generally speaking, a mistake.
Senator McConnell, one of the items that has been on the President-elect's agenda has been congressional term limits, which my memory is not something that you've been a particular fan of. What would you say to whether or not that would have any chance of daylight?
I would say we have term limits now. They're called elections. And it will not be on the agenda in the Senate. Yeah.
Any chance that now that Republicans control all the aspects of the government, that you might reconsider the earmark ban or moratorium?
I don't think so.
Senator McConnell? When you talk about bipartisan issues, criminal justice reform is something that has support on both sides of the aisle. Do you think that that is something you could look at in a new Congress? Donald Trump hasn't talked about it much. He's talked about law and order, but he hasn't weighed in specifically on any of the legislation.
Well, in terms of scheduling in the Senate, as I think you already know, we have some pretty serious divisions among Republicans on that. I wouldn't rule it out. I don't want to speak for the Speaker, but I believe he's said something about whether or not they might tackle it. So that might be a good question to ask him. If they send a bill over to us, we'll take a good hard look at it. But it is a pretty spirited debate within our conference, and we have it really not on a philosophical basis. I have some very conservative members who are in favor of it and who are opposed to it. So it didn't look to me like a good agenda item for us at this point, but I wouldn't want to rule it out for next Congress.
Senator McConnell.
Yeah.
Senator McConnell, back to this Supreme Court issue. Could you just help us understand how much advising and how much consenting you'll be doing?
Well, I was really pleased that the President-elect was already asking for our advice. As you know, many of us made suggestions when he put together a list of prospective nominees. He was in effect asking for our advice. And I think he will be open to that. And I, for one, intend to take advantage of it. I've got a few suggestions I'd like to make that I won't mention to you, but I think he's open to our suggestions about that, and I think that's good. I think it's the way it ought to work. Yeah.
You mentioned a few things in the lame duck. You didn't mention tax extenders. Is that an issue that will be in play over the next few weeks or two?
I'm not sure we're doing extenders, are we? I don't know the answer to that. That's the best answer when you don't know. Just say you don't know.
Senator McConnell.
Yeah.
You and Senator Reid have been famously at loggerheads for years now.
We both like Bryce Harper. We both pulled for the Nats, and we were both sad that the Nats didn't make it past the first round again.
I'm with you on all this. Could I just ask you, though, to expand on your thought on your relationship with Senator Schumer, and you expect a different relationship? What sort of does he bring to the table that you maybe can work with, or will be trouble areas for the two of you?
Yeah, look, I think we're getting along fine. I know you guys like to write these personality pieces. He's got a job to do, and I got a job to do. I respect him. I think he's very smart. And I think we'll be fine. We both have our roles to play. I don't expect him to enthusiastically embrace my agenda. On the other hand, to do things in the Senate, you have to have some bipartisan support, unless you're like the Democrats in 09 and 10 with 60 votes, and then they paid a big price for it 2 years later, which sort of gets back to Paul's question earlier.
McConnell, can you describe your relationship with Governor Pence, and do you expect him to be kind of a chief liaison to Capitol Hill given his governing?
Well, we all really like Mike Pence. If you've asked any of us who've served with him, everybody likes him. We all thought it was a great choice that President-elect Trump made in picking him. I would just mention the way Vice President Cheney worked with us. He was at many of our Tuesday lunches. And you know, Dick Cheney was a classic guy who didn't necessarily say anything all the time, but he was like a sponge absorbing what our concerns were, and he acted almost like President Bush's Senate liaison. And I've mentioned that to Vice President Pence, and I hope he will attend our Tuesday policy lunches when he's in town and kind of be our liaison between the administration and the Senate, much like Vice President Cheney was. Yeah.
Regarding the majority, keeping the majority, the Senate Leadership Fund said that when the Democrats started to raise a lot of money and put them in these competitive Senate races, that you personally, quote, sent up a flare to Republican donors to try to raise some more money for the effort to keep the majority. Can you tell me a little bit more about what?
You know, what I did was to call people's attention around the country, call their attention to the fact that this group existed. It was obviously operated by people that I've known well for years, and I knew what their purpose was because they announced it. Their purpose was to try to help us keep the Republican Senate. So sure, I praised them and made sure everybody was aware of their existence.
What was the key moment, though? When did you feel like you had to start?
I don't know that there was a key moment. I recommended that this group be set up, which is about all I could do legally, represented they be set up a couple of years ago, because I felt like there was no sort of outside group that was sort of looking out for us, like the Senate Majority PAC was looking out for the Democrats. There are a lot of entrepreneurs on the right, groups you've all read about and written about, you know, all from my point of view doing good stuff, but nobody was completely focused on the Senate. And so I was pleased that they came into existence, and I think all indications are they made a difference.
You mentioned that you think that there's a lot of executive orders and regulatory actions that the new president will get rid of, specifically on the climate plan, the Clean Power Plan. Do you think that he'll just drop that court case, or what's your expectation, and what would you advise him to do?
That would sure be my hope.
I mean, right away, or what's your...
That would sure be my hope. Day one would be a good idea. Yeah.
What do you say to undocumented immigrants in the country right now who might be uncertain about what their futures are with Donald Trump elected president?
Yeah, I'm not going to discuss the immigration issue today. We'll be discussing it internally with the new administration in the coming months. I'm going to take one more. Yeah.
So President-elect Trump didn't win the popular vote, as it looks like now. A, does he have a mandate, and B, what is he mandated to do?
Well, we've been there before. You know, that happened in 2000. And the American people understand that if you get 270 electoral votes, you're president. And I'd like to compliment Vice President Gore. You know, he conceded. He didn't run around saying we ought to amend the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College. He accepted the results of the system that we have. And Secretary Clinton did the same thing, to her credit, this morning. So the election is over. We know who won. And we're going to move on from there and do the best we can for the American people. Thanks a lot, everybody.